National Prosecuting Authority spokesperson Pindim Jonondwane says the case will return to court later this year.
The case relates to an incident that happened at Crowthorne Christian Academy on the 14th of August 2023, where there was an alleged disagreement between the principal of the school and one of the learners' parents regarding the school policy in relation to the hairstyle of the learner. The alleged disagreement then escalated to an incident wherein the husband to the school's principal, who is the accused in this matter, Mr. Boysen, allegedly violently pushed the learner and her mother. He was released on 2,000 rands bail on condition that he must refrain from communicating or interfering with state witnesses, whether directly or indirectly. He'll be back in court on the 2nd of October 2023 as the case was postponed for further investigations.
Meanwhile, the South African Democratic Teachers Union has labelled the incident downright racism and a gross violation of human rights. Let's speak now to Sadtu's General Secretary, Mugwena Maluleke. Very good evening to you, Mr. Maluleke. Grateful for your time. You've gone further in your statement today, calling, in fact, for government to rein in private schools. What would that entail?
Good evening and good evening to your viewers at home, and thank you indeed. What it entails basically is that the private schools are not living in an island. They live within the constitutional parameters of our country, and therefore once they're being registered, it is because they are satisfied the requirements in terms of the legislation in our country, and therefore the department has got to be making sure that they are monitoring that no policy that is adopted by the school board or the school governing body of a private school is violating any right that is enshrined in the constitution of our country, because that is the supreme law of our country, and therefore that is what it entails, that they have to be reined in, and therefore making sure that where there is transgression, they need to shut down those particular schools, and making sure that they, as the Department of Education, lay charges against the board or the management of the school should it be proven that they have practiced racism, discrimination, and any bodily harm in the form of assault that we have seen being perpetrated against the African children in those particular schools. The
challenge, though, with that position is that the same behavior happens at public schools, government-owned schools. I mean, we've seen in the especially last decade or so, multiple cases. I remember the Pretoria Girls High incident where black girls were basically banned from wearing their hair as it grows out of their scalps. Various other incidents similar in the public school sector, as I was saying. So it's not necessarily an issue to do with ownership, but more racial policies that are unfair to black people, policies that simply have not moved on across the board, regardless of who owns the school.
Actually, I agree with you. Hence, we are saying all private schools that find themselves in a situation where they don't comply with the legislation of our country, they don't comply with the constitution of our country, the Department of Basic Education and the Department of Justice have got to come in and making sure that no school can operate in our country without complying and abiding by the laws of this particular country. Because when it is private, does not mean that they have not registered. In the registration requirement, the stringent requirement that they will not discriminate, that they will not practice racism. We cannot tolerate racism, and we should not tolerate racism. Hence, the action has got to be taken. I remember very well, in terms of the Girls High in Pretoria, action had to be taken by the Department of Education to the extent that the school governing body and the board had to come in and work with private individuals who had to come and say, change your mindset as the teachers, as the white teachers and management of the school. This is a new South Africa. This is a human rights driven country, and therefore racism cannot be tolerated in our country. We've got to work very hard because institutionalized racism is still happening in many of these particular institutions. Recently, one of the managers or a director or executive director of Curo Holdings or schools also called a black teacher a monkey. in 30 years of our democracy, and it can't be tolerated. And obviously, we made the same call. And in this instance, I must say, we need to see the action from the Human Rights Commission, because the Human Rights Commission cannot fold its arms and say, I'm waiting for Maluleke to come and open a case. They have seen the viral videos there. They have got to act and then come in and making sure that we don't tolerate these things in our country.
So, when you look at what's happened with this school now we're hearing they're operating illegally, issues with the licensing, and you have to wonder if that would have even been picked up had it not been for the issue with this particular pupil and discrimination on the basis of their hair. That speaks to a gap in the system, does it not? That without this, no one would have checked probably.
Well, again, that's why we put everything in the doorstep of the department to act, because I agree with you. Had it not been this particular incident, it would have not been detected that this particular school is operating outside the policies and legislation in our country. And this is what we have been saying. Private schools that are selling education in our country cannot even be subsidized out of the public coffers, because some of them do not even adhere to curriculum that is designed, that is adopted by our parliament in this particular country. Some of them do not even comply with even the independent board that they are supposed to be registering in terms of their examination and so forth, because that board is registered with Umalusi and therefore it knows what is required. And some of these are just fly-by-night institutions like this, a Crowthorne school, because it's not registered. And therefore, it also shows that it's not only a gap, it also shows that there's inefficiencies. There's also bureaucratic, deliberate inefficiencies in our system where people believe in only shining number one province, instead of looking at what is happening to our children in this particular school, what is happening with the policies and our legislation in our country. And therefore, we call upon the department to have people who are dedicated to visit, monitor, and making sure that these schools are compliant. When it comes to the Kuros of this world, they have always been denying this racism there and so forth. But we know they cannot even employ black teachers. When they employ black teachers, they call them monkeys.
What is the role then in the broader picture of transformation of SGB, school governing bodies? Because the other argument that parents often make, especially the parents of black and Indian and colored children who face discrimination, is that because they are sometimes blocked from full participation in SGBs, etc., they are unable, for example, to fully influence the direction in which policies, etc., go at a particular school.
I wouldn't want to take that argument, because they themselves as the parents are to blame in this instance, because nobody can blame a parent with all the rights that they know that are enshrined in our constitution. They deliberately do that because they're carrying around inferiority complex. They walk around and they don't see themselves as first-class citizens as well. They see themselves as beggars, and obviously beggars will never question those that are in authority, because they believe that those are superior to them. Hence, you see these husbands to the principal who would have the guts to go and drag a 13-year-old child with her hair and so forth. It's precisely because he is walking around with this particular superiority complex and say that he's the only one who has got dignity and this particular kid does not have dignity. The parents must take it upon themselves. They have rights. They know where to report. They know what to do when they are barred from participating in this particular school. I don't blame the school board or anybody blocking anybody. You cannot be 50 there and then you're governed by 3 people as a family and then you say they're blocking. How are they blocking you? Because you have the rights. You've got to report them. It is only those who really, they allow themselves to live in a colonial era and not regard themselves as having rights and even a dignity. They allow their dignity to be invaded, to be vandalized by these particular boards and so forth. So it is them who must take responsibility and not allow themselves to be treated this way and be discriminated. In other words, they're going around begging and saying, no, these private schools are giving quality education and so forth. We have said it. It is a myth what is happening in private schools. Only those that are complying, they are able to do that. These others who are, fly-by-night are literally just milking the parents in terms of money, because they are money-making schemes. There's one in Mpumalanga that was doing the same. Bad treatment of children, bad treatment of teachers, of parents. Parents would not even be closer to the gate because they are regarded as not human beings. This cannot be accepted.
Sadtu General Secretary Mugwena Maluleke, good to speak to you. Thank you for your time tonight, sir.